I think history is full of unexpected surprises. That's why for me it's fascinating. History is not a subject. It's a way of looking at the past through the eyes of the present with a view to a future. Actually, as you said, if you study this history of elephant, it is a cultural history, it's a military history, it's a social history, it's a political history, it's a strategic history. So history is just storytelling. The way you tell the story, it depends on who reads it. This elephant was a symbol of peace and friendship because Japan felt abandoned after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hunting stops around the end of the 50s. In the next few years, a remarkable change came about in the behavior of the lion. So the lions have learned, and this is a complicated word to use, to trust humans in this particular context. So the humans have also learned new boundaries, and the boundaries are closer. I think it's a remarkable thing. And I asked a question, do lions have history?
Welcome to India Unarchived, a podcast by the Archives of Contemporary India at Ashoka University. We are honored to have with us today Professor Mahesh Rangarajan, a renowned historian, environmentalist, and professor at Ashoka University.
A Rhodes Scholar, Professor Rangarajan's pioneering work, Fencing the Forest and India's Wildlife History, has redefined the field of environmental history in India. Beyond academia, his leadership as the director of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library has bridged scholarship and policy in conservation and governance.
Join us as we delve into the intersections of history, ecology, environment, contemporary challenges, and lots of fun with one of the foremost experts in this field. Stay tuned.
Good morning, Professor Rangarajan. I am Arushi Bhargava, and this is
Mumtaz Mohiuddin.
and we are Young India Fellows from the batch of 2025. We are very excited to have you here as a guest for our podcast, India Unarchived by Archives of Contemporary India.
It's a privilege to be here. Thank you, Arushi. Thank you, Mumtaz.
Thank you.
Professor, today we are going to talk about history, the environment, and any other interests that you might have.
So it's always a privilege. I'm very happy to know, as you were just telling me, you're a student of architecture and you've been a student of history. So as someone who works as a historian, chairs an archive, I'm sure your questions will be of some significant interest.
Professor, I must admit that before coming across you or your work, I had no idea that environmental history was a domain in itself. And the idea of history, ecology, and conservation all rolled into one is truly fascinating. How did this intersection come for you? As in, was there a specific moment or a particular experience?
Intersections are all around us. So if you look at culture, music, art, cinema, gender, just to name a few instances, all of these interface with history. History is not a subject. It's a way of looking at the past through the eyes of the present with a view to a future. But a historian has a method. We look at sources. As you can see from the 5 fields I've named, the sources will differ. And the way we study them may be specific, but when we present our findings, we're assessed. Does this evidence bear out our argument? Is there other ways of reading the evidence? And is it possible to come up with another explanation? Because we've not even looked at those explanations at all. So are there questions we haven't asked? Your specific point on ecology and history actually occurred to me when I read the work of Ram Guha, The Unquiet Woods, published in 1989. I'd already started my PhD. I'd been in touch with a few senior scholars, including him and others, Richard Grove. They were pioneer historians in this field. They looked at environmental history of India, South Asia, and this was a developed field elsewhere. I also found a lot of historians of ancient India who had worked on material sources, let's say on the decline of the Harappan civilization, or denudation in the Ganga basin, or the presence of animals where we wouldn't expect them. There were rhinos close to Peshawar, hunted in the 1520s. There were elephants in parts of Udaipur till 1911. And given I was very interested in animals already, I found ways of working them into my research. And I've been in forest since teenage days, if not earlier. So I found a way of working that into my discipline.
History is often seen as something which is concerned with past, and environment feels like a very pressing and a very urgent need. How did these two blend together for you, and how did you assess them as?
In any present urgent issue you address, the dignity of women, saving the forest, just to name two, it helps to know how we got to the present juncture we are. So histories of the Chipko movement have addressed both. They've also addressed what forests mean to the peasantry. They may mean something more than just timber or livelihood. They may have a cultural value. And so I think the study of the past in this case, the forest, people, rural communities, the future of trees, and so many species and environments depend on trees, can help address it. It can't give you solutions. There's no magic bullet. But it helps to know when you're at a crossroads, where you're coming from, where you'd like to head. You do want to know where the first, second and third turn lead. And I want to emphasize there's no way to go back. Historian can't tell you, hey, let's go back to how it was in the first century, that is about 2000 years ago. Population of India was 114 million. It was less than population of UP today. So you can't go back to that. So we should study that period. But we can derive insights. But when we apply it, we should be very careful of the context of our times. So I think context and process, we're trained to think, which is why you'll find people who have studied history, and I'm not trying to boast, have turned out to be very fine diplomats. They've been in the civil service, in the IS, they've been journalists, they've been lawyers, and you'll be surprised. One of the seniors I had was a person who studied economics. He was very interested in history. He's a leading scholar of the environment and advises, policy makers on policy. So I can't name him, he'll get very upset with me. And there are many others I can name. There are filmmakers who are historians, and they will tell you that history taught me this method of thinking. So it's a way of thinking. It's not what to think, it's how to think.
What was the first piece of history, particularly environmental history, that you came across? And, what was it? How did it feel to you?
Actually, it's long before I realized I'd be a historian. There's a book called Tiger, the Story of the Indian Tiger. The Story of the Indian Tiger. It's written by the first director of Kailash Sankla. It's obviously his autobiography, and at the cover there's him with a huge tiger, which was a tiger who'd grown up in his house. He was director Delhi Zoo. I'd seen him at the age of 4. His jeep drove up next to the car we were in, and I was about to go to the Delhi Zoo the first time, and I really was excited because this was a zoo where there was a huge tiger, there's a man with his arm on the collar next to it, and everybody told me that's the director, and I knew that I wanted to be the director of a zoo so that I could go around in a jeep with a tiger. I soon realized that was not practical. I didn't particularly like science the way it was taught in school. But his book, which I purchased, by then he was a neighbor, as life has it. I went to his house and made him autograph the book. Paid quite a princely sum, 53 rupees for it. I spent months of pocket money just on that book. And chapter 4 is about the past of the tiger. It's called Trophies and Shikar. And I was, of course, always outraged by how many tigers were shot by princes. And I found that the Maharaja Riva wanted to shoot 108 tigers so that he'd get enough for a certain rosary bead. Another wanted to shoot 500 because he thought that he would be respected very much for his bravery. And all these tigers were shot by people sitting in machans. And we were living at a period in the 70s when killing a tiger was regarded as poaching. The law said so. And people who kill tigers, you got their photographs saying, look at what an outrageous thing they've done. But just a few years before, people were celebrated for killing it. And I think his book made me understand that just a few years earlier, the same act was viewed differently. And the government of West Bengal, 72, was giving out rewards for any tiger killed in the Sundarbans. All the tigers there were regarded as potential man-eaters. So if you found a tiger dead in a forest, you cut off its tail and gave it, and you got 50 rupees, which is a lot of money at that time. And this applied to other animals. So I saw Mr. Sankla in 69. As late as 72, in UP, in certain districts, contractors were given what is called a crocodile ka prize. price is if they kill the crocodile and prove that it's been killed. So they have to take the crocodile to the Tahsildar's office. He will take an inch tape and measure it, and the longer the crocodile, the more the money. It's so many annas per crocodile. So in every place that they were building water tanks, they killed crocodiles every year, which made no sense because the crocodiles eat up fish which people don't eat. And this particular crocodile, mugger crocodile, rarely attacks humans. But that's the culture. So the culture persisted and it went on. It was there around our time. But if someone did this, the crocodiles are protected species. So I lived at that transition, and this book explained why that there's it later figured out that this is only one of such transitions. Such transitions have happened across the world. So actually, looking back, I think Mr. Sanchla's book, though I will admit I spent more time looking at the wonderful photos of the tigers.
I heard Tiger and Sundarbans and my mind led me to Life of Pi. What is your opinion on Life of Pi as the book and the movie?
It's a very old tradition in this part of the world. If you remember the Hitopadesha or the Panchatantra or the Jataka, the animals have human character. So in the various stories of the Jataka, it's quite clear the wise one is the Buddha. So in the elephant, monkey, lion Jataka, or the deer Jataka is very famous. Hitopadesha, there are different animals. And in the Life of Pi, I think what's interesting is you're guessing what kind of role the tiger plays. Which of these stereotypes is it? And actually, it's difficult to pin it down. If you ask the three of us, and I'm sure you all read the book, and of course everyone's seen the movie, lots of people have seen the movie. Each of us has a different interpretation, which is mark of good literature.
What about the ending scene of the film?
Well, it kept quiet, it walked away, so it left the story open. That's what any good history does. At the end it says the future was still unfolding. So I think that's good philosophy of history behind the film, but then I would say that about anything, wouldn't I?
Over the years, I understand you must have studied many diverse environments from forests to urban landscapes. And are there any ecosystems or regions in India that you feel are under-researched?
Oh, all of them are under-researched. That's easy. I mean, the amount of work done by ecologists, sociologists, historians, students of culture, take it, archaeological remains of whatever sort. If you compare it to Europe, North America, it's a fraction. Or South Africa, it's a fraction. And the reason is these kinds of researchers had much more resources. Many more people were there per capita. Having said that, the good quality research in India matches the best in the world. And I don't think today resources are a crunch.
Would you include built heritage
Of course.
as a part of it?
Why not? Charles Correa.
Yes.
Charles Correa has a beautiful essay about architecture being about rearranging the furniture.
Yes.
And illustration in the same book is about the railway lines of Bombay,
Yes.
which are built on a certain pattern, which was to help working class settlement. And it's a paradox because it was built by the British. It's the most well-planned railway network in India for urban commuter transport. I think Madras was good second best. Madras runs something called the electric train. It's the fastest train still in urban India. You know, and as kids, we'd run to the terrace to watch the 8 o'clock electric train. And it never occurred to me then there were people hanging out of the train. Of course, it was a very male thing. I don't think they should have done it. I think it was banned, but anyway. So I think that Korea says that the person building these train lines had a vision of what the city should be. They were aware that there'd be working class settlements and middle class settlements and settlements of all walks of life of people along it. And that would take traffic off the roads. Now imagine if you were to do that in the newly developed urban conglomerations. Put in the railway before the conglomeration. You could, you just apply that to wherever we are and how much easier it would be. So here I think history of the great metropolis of Mumbai should be the future of India. You know, what Mumbai did yesterday, India should do today. Has it?
There's actually a very interesting book on it, Bombay Imagined by Robert Stephens. Yes, that book talks a lot about the plans that never got executed.
You know, one plan which did get executed is that when Kempe Gowda founded what became Bangalore city, I mean, it was a very small town. There were already villages there, of course. There was a settlement long before him. But he put the fort around. He kept intact the water bodies. And he developed a lot of water. So there's a small pond. He deepened it. He planted lots of trees around it. And it had multiple purposes. Drinking water, irrigation. And when it dried up at the worst times, you could dig wells next to it. You could pump the, pull the water out of the well and later pump it out of the well. All right. So cattle and humans could drink. Over time, these tanks became crucial to Bangalore, which is the largest Indian city, which is not by a river.
Yes.
Normally, our cities are by rivers.
Yes.
How were they able to build Bangalore? Because it's at the meeting of two geographies, Malanad hill, Maidan plain. So, you can work out what are the pluses of that, whatever they are. But one of the pluses is the water from the Malnad runs into the plain, and they built, I don't know what, they were 2,000 plus tanks even 30 years ago. Very few exist in good shape today. So there you are, what was done for centuries, 500 years. Incidentally, Delhi had lots of places such as horse cars. Horse cars was actually a source of water. All the cities of Delhi were not next to the Jamuna. And by the way, the Jamuna water was the feeding point for the water from the Aravallis. And along the Aravallis, there were check dams built. That is the original stormwater drains of Delhi. They've been destroyed in the last 15 years or 20 years. Since 2000 to 25, in this period of massive urbanization, people don't want this nala, they get it covered or whatever. But these were not sewerage drains. They were drains of the excess rainwater of Aravallis. And for a long time, this sufficed to meet the drinking water needs between Yamuna and these channels of water. Now, Delhi, the rainfall is for 48 hours a year. But between the two and the groundwater, at that time the groundwater level was high. It sufficed. And this is a very important lesson, no matter where you live in India. Just for your drinking water, there's enough water falling from the sky. But you got to save it and preserve it either on surface or the ground. And I think both Delhi and Bangalore are cases where we've ignored this. Yes. And the scholars, there's two books, and the lead author is Harini Nagendra and Seema Mundoli, ecologist and geographer. And it looks at different Indian cities and it's the same story.
Professor, your book, Fencing the Forest, it looks at how conservation started during the colonial times, which sounds like a very deep and insightful theme. What was the hardest part about researching it?
Finding the material. You have to go to different archives. For everything, one document you read 5 which you didn't find of use, 10 which you pulled out and looked at and discarded rather quickly, another 20 which came and you read them and didn't find them useful, etc., etc., etc. And getting to those places is prior to the digitization, which has made it easier. Actually harder, because you'll end up reading much more. It's, the training to pick and choose, you learn it only over time. And it's like searching for a needle in a haystack. And while you do the research, the way you tell the story changes. I was very lucky. I was waiting for the files to come in the National Archives, and I found a file which said rewards given for the destruction of dangerous beasts and venomous snakes. And I discovered this file ran for 50 years. Those are the 50 years when Government of India gave a reward for tigers and tigresses, male and she wolves, leopards and leopardesses, wolves and she, whatever, jackals and she jackals, across India. Depending on the state, it varied. And one day they stopped doing it at the pan-Indian level, 1925. It continued in the states like Bengal for tigers. So when did it begin and why? And the answer is, this practice begins in 1767 in Bengal. The first government to give rewards for all members of a species was the East India Company, Bengal. Before that, of course, the animals were killed by people to protect flocks or their, crops. And if a king or emperor went and killed an animal, people, they were very happy that he got rid of it, and he said, I've rid the evil of the earth. All that I agree, of course. I'm not romanticizing the past. But there were also other traditions which, of course, continue. They do to this day. Bon Bibi is worshipped by all the different communities who live in that area. Whatever faith you are, you have to worship her. Otherwise, when you go to the forest, the chances are a tiger will not kill you. And if it does, they'll say he didn't worship enough or didn't do obeisance that morning. There's all that, there can always be an explanation. Or that he didn't worship or she didn't with her heart or his heart. वो पूरे दिल से नहीं किया था. So I don't think under the colonial and imperial period, policy is driven by these considerations. There's a belief that what is lawless should be eliminated, and you won't be surprised. In the province I studied, Central Province, in 1818, Seoni district, the reward for the head of a bandit, lion and tiger, was the same. Of course, you could take the tail of the tiger saying the head was too heavy to carry, you'd still get the reward.
During this research, have you come across any fascinating people or any objects that you would want to talk about?
Lots. Dunbar Brander, very important. He finds a new variety of the swamp deer. He photographs it. He didn't photograph it. He took field notes. Even today, all papers on this Barasingha, which is what its local name was, the 12-tined stag, 12 tines on the antler, those pokey things it has, there are 12 of them, when it grows big, of course. The observations he conducted are of such value that even today scientists, behaviorists use them. He, however, did something else. He shot lots of tigers. So that book has 3 chapters on how to shoot the largest tiger, 3 chapters on one chapter on how to stalk it, and one on how to stuff the trophy. And they are incredible photos of tigers. The only sad fact is that he shot them before. But you then ask, in his times, was that not the norm? And the other thing, of course, is something which I'm familiar with all bureaucracies. He was famous for getting into when his petrol ration hadn't got exhausted, he'd drive the car round and round the guest house to exhaust it. Now, you could interpret it 2 ways. He could have told them that he'd saved the ration. He didn't sell it in the black market. But why did he drive round and round? Couldn't he have at least gone on a moonlight drive in the forest? So, I think history is full of unexpected surprises. That's why, for me, it's fascinating.
Professor, would you like to talk about any other fascinating people or instances or any objects that you discovered during your research?
There are many objects, but at this moment, it's difficult to pick one. There are several of interest. But Dharam Kumar Singh is someone, he's the first person to do bird ringing. He was a prince of Bhavnagar. He's educated in England, where he collected birds' eggs. The way you collect them is to put a pin, pull all the yolk out. Very destructive, but very beautiful egg collections. But fascinating that, the Florican, he shot pictures of it. These moving camera, as it was called in those days. You had to see them in a bioscope, and later he converted them. He also shot them on film reels. And he published on this, papers on it. And the Craighead brothers, who later became very famous for radio collaring, the first people to do radio collaring of the grizzly bear. This is all in the 40s, they were very young. They wrote to him, and he said, don't go by my name, Dharam Kumar Singh, call me Dharma Bapa. And if you want to come to Bhavnagar, be my guest. They not only went there, they wrote an article in National Geographic, Life with an Indian Prince, which has photographs of him with, black bucks, which were there in the Bhavnagar, one of the very important reserves for the black buck and wolf today, exclusive shooting reserve for the princely family. After 1969-72, shooting was banned. He became a very important pioneer of natural history. He wrote a book called The Birds of Saurashtra. He co-authored several papers, and along with the principal of Rajkumar College, he conducted the first census of a vertebrate carnivore using pug marks, probably in the whole of Asia, of the lion in 1952 and 55. And this is not a method today which would be used. It's a fascinating figure, and he is the first person who wrote about how the behavior of lions changed once hunting stopped. Before that, they would only go near you if you are dressed like the local Maldaris, who don't hunt lions. They drive them away. They're buffaloes if in a group type of way. The lions, of course, kill and eat buffaloes, then as now. And he found that if you went wearing safari dress, like the guards, they would trust you, because the guards were not involved in hunting. But the change was that the hunting had also stopped. Hunting stops around the end of the 50s. And he says that In the next few years, a remarkable change came about in the behavior of the lion. So one of my papers is based on this, and I asked a question: do lions have history?
That's the title in the paper.
Do they have memory? It's called Lions with the Rich, Animals with the Rich History, the Lions of Gir Forest.
Do lions have memory?
I don't know. I mean, it's one of the questions. I have very interesting evidence which suggests it's a matter for future research. My biologist friends tell me there's something called memory imprinted genetically. So you put a snake next to a baby gorilla, it will run away. It won't pick it up. Now, I think it's because all primates are scared of things which look like snakes. Where if it's a rabbit, they'll pick it up. But then rabbits are furry. Could it be that? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know. I'm not qualified to answer that. What I am qualified to say is that in the Gir forest, the fear of lions went away. Maybe it was passed from generation to generation. No lions from outside Gir was there. All the lions in Gujarat, and by the way, they're roaming around at 30,000 square kilometers. There are shots of lions in a car park outside Ahmedabad. You wonder why they don't jump on top of the car and hang around there. And people there, if they shout a lot from little distance, the lion will jump off and go. The people have also developed ways of living with the lions. And you should give a lot of credit to people who are able to do that. The Maldaris are able to do it. Then the people around the Gir were able to do it. Now this doesn't mean they're big pussycats, please. They're not. The people also know that. They keep the distance. They don't go and pat the cow. They take their cell phone out and take photos. Sometimes in the cell phone photo, there'll be 3 people who would go behind and stand. Not too close. Mother's watching, you remember. So I think that this sense of distance has lessened. The lions have learnt, and this is a complicated word to use, to trust humans in this particular context. But the humans have also learnt new boundaries, and the boundaries are closer. So I think it's a remarkable thing. Now, some people say, oh, they've tamed Gir lions. I'm sorry, I have a somewhat different. But when you look at the last 100 years, now, are they similar to places where people go in jeeps crowding around tigers? Yes. But this has happened in the same time period, give or take 10 years. In tigers, it happened after 72. Lions, it started in 1960. But I think with the Gir is a much more fascinating case. And I think a more positive one in the sense that in Gir, tourism is very strictly controlled. There's some uncontrolled tourism outside, which is illegal. I'm very worried about this phenomenon of so many jeeps crowding around tigers, which are open jeeps with people hanging out. This is in about 4 or 5 parks. There are many other parks where you can open jeep, but you don't crowd around that. Crowding around it, everything indicates that the carnivore may feel threatened. So what if you fall off the jeep? Then its behavior may change. So I think the history of the lion in this case, which I've studied a little bit, and I've written a little bit about these tigers, intensively hunted zones where you never saw a tiger in the day, where they come and sleep or they see themselves sunning. They totally ignored tourists.
Do you think architecture and urban conservation can help?
Always. One of the fascinating things I've found about architecture is the attention given to water in cooling. So you find the buildings, even of the colonial period, they adapted a lot of techniques. Everything about imperialists wasn't bad. So if you go to the older bungalows, I think we should convert them into museums. And architects can explain, historians can explain, culture studies can explain. And if you book it, you can hold your classrooms there, teaching rooms or whatever, demonstration rooms, free. You have to book it in advance. I'm serious. I am extremely serious. You can have one part as a museum, and you can also allow classes to be held in the garden. Picnics also allowed with the garden, with the class, but they have to clean up the mess. And they have to record their views on a web page over there within 24 hours. They can do it later also. But when they go, they should write in the pistol book, whatever they want. So that, in the long run, is how you build a register of how you're giving this place meaning, a building meaning, an older building. You're going to do the recent building also. So the heritage buildings, where possible, this can be done.
Like a historical society.
Of course, you can have a small room constructed next to it if you don't want footfall to go up so much. As soon as you finish the guided tour, you go there.
Professor, apart from environmental history, are there any other domains that you're interested in exploring?
Actually, as you said, if you study this history of elephant, it is a cultural history, it's a military history, it's a social history, it's a political history, it's a strategic history. So history is just storytelling. The way you tell the story It depends on who reads it. The histories of war horse in medieval Europe. It is all of those things. I'm just giving an instance. Thomas Trautmann has written a beautiful book, Elephants and Kings. He said the kings in ancient India, the powerful ones, had lots of elephants. Therefore, they protected the forest. And they had to work in tandem with the forest dwellers. And they also had to be aware that the cultivators at the edge of forest could be very upset with elephants. The forest dwellers knew how to avoid them. The elephants were attracted even then when there was very little encroachment to the crops, because it's a fast food restaurant for them, I mean, using modern terminology. So this book gives us a very interesting insight. It's like a rectangle: king, elephant, forest dweller, cultivator. And this model is exported to the whole of Southeast Asia, not into China. China, they killed the elephants over 3,000 years. That's why there was one of the reasons elephants, this 3,000 to, well, about 2,000 years, is little less than 2,000 years, a little more. We're really unsure when this began. Definitely 6th century BC it began, so a little more, 2,600 years. Elephant protection has been seen as the Raja Dharma of the rulers. Incidentally, the British also brought this law in 1873. Not all elephants, of course, the elephants that they declared as rogues who could kill. So I think when you look at elephant protection in certain Asian societies, Southeast Asia, it had deep historical strategic roots. Of course, it also had a cultural value. When the elephant comes and destroys your crops, you say it's coming in the way of your work, your food. It's destroying your cup. Okay. But after it dies, you may feel that it needs rituals, 13-day ritual. So, it depends on the context of the animal, who it is, where it is. This is a cultural studies issue. You don't seek help of an Indologist. They may know the language, or someone who knows the language of that area.
What you said is really interesting. As you said, it depends on what the story is about and who reads it. If we read about the horses brought from Persia, they help us connect with the stories of connectivity between two nations because of animals.
घोड़ा अपना अरबी है, चरता है मेहरौली में, देखो कैसी चर्बी है, गुलजार. बट अरबी घोड़ा जब आया, तुर्की घोड़ा जब आया, फारसी घोड़ा जब आया, तब हिंदुस्तान यानी कि आज का यूनियन ऑफ इंडिया नहीं था, वहाँ का रिपब्लिक ऑफ ईरान नहीं था, किंगडम ऑफ सऊदी अरेबिया नहीं था. So the modern nation state is a modern creation. And by the way, this route is cut off in 1830 when the British become powerful in the areas which become British India. And there are a lot of civil wars in Afghanistan. They cut off that trade route. But the older trade route, which people do not keep in mind, most of the Vijayanagar horses were brought by Arab traders who called the Indian Ocean Bahar al-Hind, the Indian Ocean. That's the Arabic for Indian Ocean. All right. When they came, they brought these horses, and these horses, like a Cadillac, all right, or what is it called? Apple Mac. They are the Cadillacs of that world, or the Apple Mac of that world, whether they were Arabi horses brought by the Portuguese, or the same could apply in southern India, by the way, you may not know, to elephants from what is now Indonesia, because they were big. All right. So these imported animals, of course, were connecting creatures. And there's right now a very interesting thesis being written in Yale by Professor Sunil Amrit's student about how elephants connected the Indian Ocean world. And it may interest you to know that the Belgians in Congo, when they wanted training of the African elephant, bush elephant, took some mahouts and elephants from South India and tried out exactly those techniques. Now, whether they worked or not, that's the history. And also the imported animal, sometimes they're crossbred.
Leading to newer.
Sometimes the imported animal grows bigger in the new environment. So if you see the biggest Brahmini bulls, you know where they are? Brazil. Well, there's a lot of alfalfa for them. Alfalfa costs much less in Brazil than in India. They've eaten it, it's fantastic climate. and the Brazilian alfalfa eating bull and the buffalo, Indian by the way, by origin. There are other origin stories which have a different ending. The major species on Delhi Ridge is the Vilayati kikad, mesquite bean, grown in India from the 1880s, brought in 1911. The British wanted the ridge to be like a garden, forest garden. So they drilled holes and planted lots of these trees. You see photographs taken by Beato before the 1880s, 1850s. There are no trees in the ridge, very few. थोड़े थोड़े झाड़ है, वो हमारे कीकड़ के झाड़ है, बाबुल, you know बाबुल, Acacia nilotica. But this Prosopis juliflora, you know what it did? It took over the whole place.
Spread.
Now, poor people like it because it gives firewood. Birds like it because they eat up the beans. If you put parakeets, they'll eat the bean. But it's wiped out the local fauna. If you talk to any ecologist, it's their nightmare. And it's not just in here, you're talking about arid landscapes, deserts, large parts of the Barni grassland of Kutch has been taken over by this. So one idea could be, you chop these trees off. This was suggested by C.R. Babu for the Delhi Ridge. Stage by stage, chop the tree. You have to go down and pull out the root, otherwise it will regrow. You give it to all the people on BPL license at their rate, all right? Yeah. Immediately plant over there a native flowering and fruit tree. Guard it. After 5 years, allow people to take the flowers and fruits. But ensure that the reproduction of those trees is the young ones are protected. That's all you do. Allow some keycuts. Now this is the question. You have to eliminate those keycuts. It's an area where other trees should grow. Because there's a very interesting feature with the keycut. They cover the canopy. So trees which can handle absence of sunlight can grow. It's not that it's 100%. So you see, when you bring a new, something new in, it can overwhelm, but not all. So can you imagine eating dosa without chili powder? Maybe you can, I can't. Chili powder is made from chili. It comes from Latin America. Can you go to the dhaba here, dosa, and eat without masala dosa? Masala is aloo sabzi, you know, South Indian version. Potato is from Bolivia. You like bhutta, and people will say, "Arey, ye Gadwali Kovani bhutta hai." It's not. It's originally again from Bolivia, but it's naturalized. What about us? We are all descendants of African Eve who came, I don't know, 2000 or 3000 generations ago. But look at us. We are different cultures, different faiths, living as one large human family. So I think history also shows that there are different ways of thinking. And the way out is to reason with them and respect the fact that another person may have other ways of reason.
So, Professor, talking about different tangent, I am very curious to know, what was the first time when you actually stepped in an archive?
Oh no, for the first 2 months I was virtually crying when I left. I couldn't find a thing. And the person with me was a senior who said, that's how it always is. That's how it always is. If you learn, don't worry. So I ordered rare books and I kept reading them in spare time. I kept ordering these tomes and I was searching in the wrong place, you see. Then one of the archivists came out for a cup of tea with me and said, you're the guy ordering these papers. You're interested in forests. And he'd never met a person in forests. And there was a person from Madhya Pradesh. He was Dr. Mehra. Very interesting, a very short man. He's not even 4 feet. I always used to greet him out of respect. But I was a little scared of talking to him. He's obviously very learned. And he came up and said that you're the first man interested in forests. And I was member of the Wildlife and Forest Society in my college. I wish there was a guy like you. We'd have called you to speak. I said, I was in school at that time. Then he laughed. And he said, you're looking for these papers? Come and have tea with me tomorrow. And he wrote down 5 sets and he said, order in these sets. And they were not the sets I was looking for. So, you know, you're very grateful to people like this. They help you.
Coming back to your book, Nature and Nation, could you please tell a bit more about it, what the actual theme is and how did the idea materialize?
So let me illustrate. You see, when Shinzo Abe came to India in 2007, that's Japan, he addressed the Joint House of Parliament. He spent 7 minutes on the baby elephant, Indu, which was sent by the Prime Minister of India in 1949 to Japan. Now this is well known. If you go to internet, you will see the photo. But if you see the photo of this baby elephant going from the dockyard to the zoo, you will see that all along the road there were cheering children with Japanese Indian flag and they were shouting in Japanese, "Hindu, welcome to your new home." Shinzo Abe said this elephant was a symbol of peace and friendship because Japan felt abandoned after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But what I found, and this is there in this book, is the school children of Japan, probably the school teacher may have advised them to do this and check the spellings, wrote a letter to the Honorable Prime Minister of India saying that the 6 Indian elephants in the zoo had been killed in the Allied bombing. And they were very sad. They wanted to see an elephant. Could he at least send one baby elephant and it would grow up and they could see it? And they promised to help their elders take care of it. In return, they had asked their teacher to present 6 Japanese giant salamanders. It's interesting to note nobody in Prime Minister's office or South Block knew what a giant salamander from Japan was. They couldn't find it in their books immediately. But anyway, this elephant was packed off. And then this very interesting photo of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru with Mrs. Indira Gandhi and the Indian ambassador with this elephant, and they are surrounded by school children. And Ian Miller in his book has an entire section devoted to the importance of this particular elephant in the imagination of Japan to this day. Now this elephant died and it was replaced by another elephant sent from India, and then Indian policy changed, we stopped exporting elephants. So, the nature and nation here, the nation and nature blend in this elephant. The Japanese nation, Indian elephant, in the instance of friendship and amity.
Professor, last question. How can environmental history help us tackle with India's ecological challenges at the current time? And how do you see Ashoka Archive is contributing to this understanding?
Humility and patience. You can't tackle any issue which has such deep roots without humility. You may do something and find that's not the way to do it. So, they picked up lions from Gir forest and took them to Chandraprabha in an area they were unfamiliar with people who didn't know how to live with them. They killed cattle. They were poisoned. Now, maybe they were shot by hunters. At that time, there wasn't even a proper law to protect them. There wasn't enough informed guards to protect them. They didn't carry out an information consciousness program. It was not a large enough forest with enough prey. So I think in data reintroductions like rhino of Dudhwa, to just give an instance, this has been built in. Now, has it been built in every such program is what we have to see. By the way, the best archive, as far as I know, one of the best archives, so the people who knew about the lion relocation is in Ashoka, in the papers of Dharam Kumar Singh, Divya Banu Singh, and on the cheetah, the papers of Dr. Ranjit Singh, who was involved with, and Divya Banu Singh, who were involved with the original plan to reintroduce the cheetah. And you can get that in the next building in the basement. You just have to come here, you can look at the catalogue and look at it. This applies to several other fascinating figures such as Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, philosopher, Vice Chancellor, Vice President, very famous student and teacher. If you see his 8th class grade and right up to his PhD, the report of the examiner, you might want to have been a better student.
Thank you so much for sharing these insightful insights with us today. It has been a pleasure having you with us. We are looking forward to many such conversations in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Welcome.